All right. Hello, everybody. It's I, Alejandro Rojas. So, I'm a journalist. I've written about UFOs for a very long time, and I am here to share with you a lot of cool stuff, some news and information about UFOs. So, there's always news. That's what's really cool. And I don't know that many other people do this like I do, where I'm looking at the news headlines from around the world. And surprisingly, there are news articles all over the place. Sometimes, I've talked with other people and they're like, well, how do I find information to talk about? Well, there's tons of stuff out there. So we're going to take a look at it. And especially right now, it's a really important time in this field because a lot of really important stuff is happening. So we'll get right to that. I also want to just point out there's several sites that I'm going to be pointing you to that I write for or work with. One is Open Minds TV, where I put lots of my UFO stuff. Another is the International UFO Congress, the coolest UFO conference out there. And then you can see all my stuff at Alejandro T. Rojas, the blog, and my Twitter there. So let's get into the UFO news that's out there. So first, usually I start us off on my Patreon. So let's go take a look at that. Patreon. So, of course, this is a site where a lot of podcasters and stuff are putting up their stuff, and you can see what I've been working on. And we'll start off here with my latest article about Project Blue Book. And this is another link somewhere else that I write, Den of Geek. So Den of Geek is a super cool website. Talks about sci-fi entertainment for the most part. And that's essentially what this story is about, is how, Blue Book is sci-fi. So you can see here that I wrote History Be Damned as the Nazis Invade on Project Blue Book, Episode 4. What do I mean by that? It's that if you've been watching this television show on the History Channel, Project Blue Book, it's based on real life stuff. So the lead character is Dr. J. Allen Hynek, played by Aidan Gillen. And Dr. Hynek really did work with the Air Force back from 1948 to 1969 while the Air Force had official UFO investigations going on. So that's who he is portraying. His wife is Mimi in the show and in real life. And she's being portrayed in the show as well. In fact, this woman that we see here is a Russian agent who is befriending Mimi. That never happened. So there was no Russian agent that we're aware of that befriended Mimi. In fact, when I was writing this story, I emailed Paul Hynek, who is one of the sons of the Hynek family. And I interviewed him on my podcast, Open Minds UFO Radio. If you listen to my podcast, you can see links to that below. And I asked him what he thought about kind of the storyline where his mom is getting involved with these Russians and everything. And he said, well, it never happened, but I do kind of like the show, and I'm not disturbed by it because they have to fictionalize things and add some adventure. And it kind of shows what was going on at the time with all this spy stuff and secrecy and kind of, how we were very in a battle, in a Cold War. With Russia. So he doesn't mind it. A lot of people are like, oh, how can they? The family must be devastated that they're just, creating all of this fantasy stuff. And no, the family doesn't mind. And so that's why I say history be damned, because this episode is pretty much entirely, very little of it is drawn from necessarily real history. But what's interesting about this is that a lot of it is drawn from real conspiracy theories and speculation and some UFO mythology out there. So if you haven't seen the episode, then there might be a few spoilers in here. I know that my friends out of the country have not been able to watch the show, at least that's what I hear. Because I guess maybe licensing things where it's not out there. And let me know if you're in the chat and you're like, hey, man, I live in the UK and I could watch it, then it'll prove me wrong. But I heard some people saying they couldn't get to it. But in this episode, essentially what happens is there is a UFO sighting. Then there's Dr. J. Allen Hynek, and then there is another guy, Captain Quinn. Captain Quinn was not based on a real character. He's kind of an amalgamation of the different Air Force officers who did work in Project Blue Book, and also the sense from the Air Force that, UFOs are explainable, there's nothing to them, so it's no big deal. Well, Captain Quinn says, I know what that UFO was. This commercial airline pilot plane that witnessed this object kind of fly around them was near Huntsville, Alabama. And he says, you know what? They took these Nazi scientists and they put them in Huntsville and they're building rockets, and that's what it's got to be. So they go to Huntsville, Alabama. They talk to these scientists. The head scientist is Wernher von Braun. And Quinn's upset. He breaks into the base. He feels like they're probably doing some experimentation and they have no regard for the safety of the people there. And so, or the people in the commercial airline. But Hynek talks to Wernher von Braun and he says, yeah, we are testing rockets. He even shows him a secret rocket test. And he says, but, that was ours and I'm sorry. Hynek doesn't believe him because in the description, this object was hovering and doing different sorts of maneuvers. So Quinn and Hynek suspect there's something more going on. They break into the base later. And they don't discover necessarily what was flying around the craft, but they discover this weird body. And I'm going to bring this up. I did warn you there were spoilers in here, but it's not that big of a deal. You still got to watch the show. You still should be watching this. It's not that. But here's what I want to show you are some images from the show. And there's one particular image that has created a lot of controversy, especially with UFO researchers. And they have been livid, many of them, because of this image. And I'm going to show it to you. Some of you may already know what image I'm talking about. And it doesn't look like it's on here anymore. It used to be right here. Holy moly, we've got another conspiracy going on. But that's okay. I'm going to describe the picture to you. Essentially, it's Dr. Hynek standing next to this kind of vat with this alien on the other side. Or that's what it appears. Well, when they broke into the base, that's what they discovered. They thought, oh my gosh, is this an alien? What's going on? They get out of there because some alarms go off. They eventually get busted. Wernher von Braun says, oh, that was a monkey. We were doing some tests and we launched him into space and we're testing the physical effects of space on this monkey. So it turned out to be a monkey. A lot of people were upset. And when I interviewed David O'Leary, the show creator and writer, he told me it's not what you expect. So I know people are getting upset. They're like, hey, Hynek never saw an alien. In the show, he didn't either. Of course, we don't know that he ran into any hairless monkeys, too, that were being used for experimentations. But either way, at the end of the show, should I tell you guys? It's in this story. I'm going to tell you. It's a spoiler, but it's important because I want to give you some information about the real background with all of this. At the end of the show, they wheel out this craft, and this craft actually looks like an experimental saucer-shaped craft that they really did work on in the past. Now, this craft was going to be more like a drone or like a quadcopter because it had these ducted fans, and the fans would push down and lift up this UFO thing. Some of you may remember that they were, when I was a Boy Scout, was it called A Boy's Life or whatever the magazine you get as a Boy Scout? On the back page, they had all these cool things. And it said, build your own hovercraft using lawnmower engines. I don't know anybody who actually did it, but it was the same kind of thing. It just blows the wind down and you create this kind of hover thing. Well, in the television show Project Blue Book, this thing, they put this, they kind of wheel it out, and then they bring this pilot, and this pilot has his spacesuit on, and he's like, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this. But somehow he couldn't struggle because he seemed to be drugged or something. So, again, it kind of harkens back to, these evil scientists, they are experimenting on humans who don't want to be experimented kind of unethically, like, we know that the Nazis did. They put him in this craft. All of a sudden, this weird stuff starts happening all around it, these weird fields, and it disappears. Wow. So, that's what happens in the story. I like this story. It was fun. It was entertaining. It was exciting. I do get frustrated. I would prefer if there was some history, actual real history that they would stick to. But, I've talked with producers before. I've worked with them. The Roswell show I recently did. Others. It's really hard to get them, and it's to really stick to reality. And it's just the Hollywood industry. The mindset in television is like reality doesn't sell. Nobody really wants it. We have to fake stuff. We can pretend some things are real, but we got to, throw some junk in there. It's very frustrating, but it's the way it is. And hats off and kudos to National Geographic, because they've really been kind of getting back to the old school of really doing legit documentaries and stuff like that. So I'm very happy, but that's about the only channel that does that. Of course, History's the home of Ancient Aliens, which has a lot of kind of dubious information in it. But this is, they've expertly weaved in a lot of these conspiracy theories out there. So Wernher von Braun, there's a lot of theories around him that he probably was involved with the Roswell crash, that there was really an alien spacecraft. Not that we necessarily know that for sure, but there, as I've talked about in this show and written about recently, there is a mystery there. But there's also this somebody who worked for him who said that when he was dying, he said, that they're making these essential false flag kind of accusations out there for the defense industry to get more funds, and one day they're going to pretend there's an alien invasion. It's not true. Don't believe them. It's not real. So this is some of the mythology around Wernher von Braun and Project Paperclip. There's also, I've got links to some of these stories here, like they're in here, down here when I get into all of this stuff that I'm talking about now. But there were rumors that the Nazis had actually dealt with aliens, these aliens who created these spacecraft that they called Fugel rods, and the technology they shared with the Nazis. All of this sort of thing. And you know how it is. These mythologies sprout up. A lot of this has been supported by neo-Nazis. Most of it is not credible or accurate whatsoever. I mean, it is very accurate that in World War II, the Germans had some advanced technologies. They were the first to develop jet propulsion, or at least use jet aircraft. They were way ahead of us in that arena. Wernher von Braun was, part of the V2 program, where they built missiles and rockets. Essentially, they were to deliver, a payload of weaponry to bomb people, which they did. So that technology was cutting edge and being developed. So when we took them, of course, there's lots of talk of the space program, which is kind of a side project, really. It became a political one. But what was the main project? You can probably imagine. Delivering the atom bomb via missile, ballistic missiles. V2 was the first ballistic missile. So that's why these guys were so important, is to develop these weapons. And these were very advanced aircraft. In fact, there's another one, and let me show you this, because this is really cool. So there was this jet called the Horton Who. Here's a little bit of a picture up there. This is a Smithsonian page. I guess they have it at the museum. But this was a Delta craft shaped thing. Here's a picture of it. Here's what's left on the stand here. But this, you can see, is a large wing with jets. This was very advanced. The question here is it stealth? It just shows that they were very cutting edge. So the design here, of course, is what we used for stealth aircraft, a large delta wing type of configuration. And this story goes into also how they were layering these different materials to also further confound the radar. So essentially, they were building stealth technology in Germany way back then. So they were very far advanced with technology. Of course, in the modern era, jets and missiles are old school, so we've got to kind of come up with some other great technologies they had, such as alien technology. Not the case. But there's another big conspiracy kind of theory out there, or that is around something called the Philadelphia experiment. Some of you might have heard of this. And let's take a picture or look at this, because there's a couple of pictures we can look at here as well. So this is a story from People magazine about how the Philadelphia experiment works. It's actually How Stuff Works, the website. So allegedly, in 1943, the Army was building a cloaking device, or the Navy was building a cloaking device, and they tested it on this, the USS Eldridge. When they turned this advanced thing on that was usually electromagnetic and stuff and all this craziness, like my UFO back here, except for not as well, now that we've perfected the technology right there. But the Eldridge disappeared, like the craft at the end of Project Blue Book. Well, when it reappeared, people were sick, some of the crewmen. Some of them died because they were embedded into the steel of the hull. This was the story of one person. This person had told this story, and they heard it secondhand to this guy who wrote UFO books. But even this guy in his UFO book where he mentioned it said it doesn't sound credible. This guy to me is not credible. I don't think this really happened. But it still became a big thing. More books were written about it, and now it's this whole deal. In fact, there's probably someone listening right now that's like, the Philadelphia experiment was real, man. But I mean, it just has very dubious origins and likely. And plus, there's a whole history of the Eldridge. And there was, you may remember, a movie that was created called the Philadelphia Experiment, and where a modern kind of battleship, I think it was Charlie Sheen in it, was accidentally sent back into the past, and they had to find their way back here to the modern times. They had to get back in time. That's from Time something. Oh, why can't I remember that? Back to the Future, because they had to get back to the future. And that was Huey Lewis in the news. Gotta get back in time. Anyway, that's the Project Blue Book. So I got lots of links to all this stuff. Of course, it was very much diverging from reality, but it was still a fun show. Otherwise, the shows that I've had, the only other thing up here on my Patreon is my show with Martin Willis. And I want to show you something else too here. Alejandro Rojas is my blog. In fact, I'm probably going to be showing you my blog more. I'm developing this blog page here where I can put all of my stuff as opposed to Patreon, because I just want to kind of mix all my stuff together and have one place where everybody can get to it. A hub, a customized hub for everything. And I have put something, so we're going to talk about the Space Force in a minute in the news. But my last UFO Seriously Live from last week. And then here is what I was going to talk about now, which is the radio show. It was really just, if you've listened to the podcast, at the beginning of the show, I have Martin Willis from Podcast UFO, and we talk about the news. But that's essentially what we did the entire show. So we talked about similar things that I talked to you all about here. But there's another interesting story. Oh, a couple. Here's the new space race to the moon explained, because we are in a space race with Russia and China to go back to the moon, just like the old days, like Wernher von Braun was working on to take us to the moon. Also, this is a really interesting story. Denver's haunted Cheeseman Park. Look at this. I'm going to show you this for a minute, because they only moved the headstones. They didn't move the bodies. Bum, bum, bum. Where did I get that line? Poltergeist. So I even embedded this video from the end, because at the end here, we'll see if we can see the part. Oh, here it is. This is really funny. Because so he's a real estate guy, right? And they're selling all these homes in this neighborhood, and all this crazy stuff is happening. And here's his boss, the builder, and he's like, you just moved the headstones, you didn't move the bodies. And that's why the bodies are haunting his house here in Poltergeist, a wonderful Steven Spielberg film. some of you older people are like, yeah, duh, everybody knows Poltergeist, but the kids don't. The kids don't know all these classic movies, so you got to share it with them. But essentially, that was the gist of the movie Poltergeist, and it really did happen in Denver. And people do around this neighborhood claim that their homes are haunted. So that's a story I have there. But yeah, you could also see my last podcast. My next podcast is going to be great. It's with Nick Pope. Nick Pope used to work for the UK Ministry of Defense investigating UFOs. They had a UFO research program all the way up until 2008. Nick was involved with that program in the early 90s for a few years. And since he's been out, he's kind of like a Dr. J. Allen Hynek from Project Blue Book. He went in a skeptic. He came out saying, hey, there's a real mystery to this. In the defense, we were looking for the potential for a threat. This is a potential for a threat because we have unknown objects flying around in our airspace. So what is Nick really interested in now? He's interested in this secret Pentagon program that was very close to what he was doing. This program that is ran by Lou Elizondo. The world really learned about it. Last December, well, the couple Decembers ago, it's been over a year now, when Lou Elizondo was written about in the New York Times, and this program was discussed. Well, Nick has found some FOIA information about this program that he's going to be sharing with us. What's really important, too, is he's going to be sharing with us how he came to those files. And the reason, here's why it's interesting. What happened is that there's been a lot of attention on ATIP since this New York Times article. And so there's no doubt that the Department of Defense is very aware of all the people who have submitted Freedom of Information Act requests, including myself. Well, often what happens when one request is fulfilled, then those papers are essentially declassified. So if you're able to get a hold of someone in the PR department or another department, sometimes you'll be able to get those articles without having to file for them through a Freedom of Information Act request. And that's how Nick was able to get to them, even though it was the files were released in a response, it seems, from the Federation of American Scientists. And we talked about that last week, but Nick and I will be talking about this in more detail and the implications on the next Open Minds UFO Radio. While I've paused here, let's go check out the chat. Hey, chat peoples. They're asking 8-ball questions. So in the chat, this is really fun. You can write pound 8-ball, and you can ask questions. So I can ask the 8-ball, am I cool? And ask the question, and in a few seconds, it will answer me here in the chat. So it's a good reason to be in the chat. Oh, it looks like Martin Willis, who I was just talking about, is also in here. Has this been on for 20 minutes? Martin says. I don't know. Probably. Let's see. 6:23. It has been. Holy moly. All right. So let's get. Let's see if there's any other questions in here. People are asking the 8-ball questions for the most part, it appears. Somebody saying, hello, I'm late. No problem, Ellie Mae. Back to the Future, Ellie Mae said when I was trying to remember that movie. That's right. Somebody said they have something interesting for me, but not a lot of questions. Who is today's Wernher von Braun? I don't know. As far as it comes to actual scientists, I don't know. And maybe I should, as far as people working inside the government. Otherwise, I would say Elon Musk. I think by far there are some people kind of close behind that are building some rockets. For example, Jeff Bezos and Blue Origins are very close. But really, Elon Musk is doing the best. If you may have seen some stories where he's essentially renamed his huge spaceship that he wants to essentially take people to Mars with, the spaceship, and it is a It is, they're building it with stainless steel, so it's going to look very, very futuristic, and it is absolutely humongous. I mean, this thing's incredibly huge. So, yeah, he would be the closest to a real life Werner von Braun. He's taking us to places that we never imagined before, especially with this technology where he's able to take a rocket and then land it and then reuse it. That's like very futuristic. So yeah, so I would say that. Someone asked, when can we expect more Roswell Decoded? I don't know, actually. I've talked to the producer today, and they're working on it. So it looks like there may be more shows, maybe on different topics we'll be able to do here in the near future. So we're hopeful that there'll be some more, because we want to, look into more stuff regarding Roswell. And of course, we want to follow up on some of the investigations that we did on that show. And if you're not aware, you can go watch this Roswell Mysteries Decoded on the CW Seed, which is an app and a website where you can watch some CW shows for free. So go check that out. And what we did essentially was just investigate Roswell. So I wanted to demonstrate that it is a true mystery, and second, that there are some avenues of investigation that could still be fruitful. Somebody asked about Virgin Galactic. Virgin Galactic is kind of behind the times. Of course, they got Spaceship One, or now Spaceship Two. One of their first craft crashed, and so that delayed them a few years. They believe that they may be the first to technically take people, civilians. Let me change that. They wouldn't be the first to take civilians into space. Actually, there's another company that did that, where essentially people were able to hitch a ride on Russian rockets. This was earlier ago, and that happened many times. But there is a new Virgin Galactic will be taking regularly scheduled flights up into space. They've already sold hundreds of tickets, many to celebrities, and they should be flying soon. However, this craft goes up into space for just essentially, here's what it does. If you're not familiar with Virgin Galactic, they're very different. What most want to do is kind of traditional, what you see, on television, or what happens with the astronauts. They want to have rockets that go up into space. A capsule essentially launches the last leg of this journey, where people are then in this large capsule. They're able to float in space for a period of time before the capsule comes down. And that's what Blue Origins want to do, and some others. And that's more of what you think about when you're going to space, right? And this, you'll be able to experience weightlessness. You'll be able to be in space. Then you'll come down, just like the astronauts in this module. They will put up parachutes, and then you'll float down to Earth. Virgin Galactic, however, essentially is flying a space plane sort of thing up into space that's being carried by another craft. So this large double fuselage plane takes the attached craft up into the sky. The attached rocket plane then shoots up from there into space, but it's only in space for a few seconds before it comes back down and then coasts on its wings and lands again. So it's the Virgin Galactic one is going to be a short little stint in space, as opposed to, the rocket one. So these rocket ones have kind of caught up, but Virgin Galactic says this year they're going to be ready to start their other flights. If any of you have tickets, hopefully you'll be able to cash in. If they can't do it, I'm sure they're going to have to owe millions and millions of dollars, because these tickets are somewhere in the around $200,000. Wow. And they're going to fly out of New Mexico, Elephant Butte area spaceport. So somebody asked, the best official UFO video ever released. Official. I would say, I don't know. We've got there's not a lot in the way of official UFO videos that have been released. There are a suite of videos that were released in this New York Times article that I talked about, related to the Pentagon UFO project. One of those cases in particular, the Nimitz case, which, if you heard my last podcast with David Beatty. We talked about that incident in detail. But you can't see a whole lot there, and we're not certain that the incident that took place with multiple witnesses where a jet chased a Tic Tac type object, there wasn't any video that has been released regarding that incident, although there probably was video obtained. The video that was released was a short video that happened later in the day. So we don't have from that incident. So we don't have a lot of information about the analysis to be certain that is something that was anomalous in that video. But still, we have a lot of witness testimony. There was allegedly some radar taken, and we have the radar witnesses who testify to that. So a really great case. Another great case, and you can find this at, I believe the URL is scuonline.org. You can also find it on openminds.tv. In fact, let me show it to you here because we were some of the people, essentially, I got to break this story because I was friends with the researchers, and then essentially, there it is. And help them out with the board. So Homeland Security records 2 UFOs in Puerto Rico. That's not it. Experts chime in. So I've got a bunch of stories on this. But essentially, this was a video released by some personnel with Homeland Security. They said what they captured, they witnessed this thing, and we've got a video on this case right here. But what's great about this is essentially what happened is some people that I worked with were able to work with the witnesses in this case, the Homeland Security personnel who obtained the video, and they analyzed the video for a couple years and wrote a long, big report on it before letting everybody know. So they released this report. The video did leak to a couple places, but they also released the full video. And it's a very mysterious object. Some people believe that they have determined what it is. However, there are some UFO experts, such as Dr. Richard Haynes and others, who have looked at that video and say they can't figure out what it is. This is the type of unit that recorded that video. And essentially what had happened is that, let's see if I have a map. I guess I don't have it. But you know what? Let's go look. The internet's so cool. I'm going to show you essentially what happened here on a map. So this is the area that it took place near the airport, which is right here. So essentially, there's a base here where the Homeland Security Customs plane took off. Essentially, this plane is doing rounds to look for drug runners. Well, as they're taking off, and they kind of were taking off in a circle like this, they spotted an object out in the ocean. It was dark out, and they saw a light, and that's a very important part of this. They saw a light coming in from the ocean, and then the light turned off. Well, luckily, they were able to train their forward-looking infrared camera, which we just saw in that article, this camera here. They were able to train that on the object and see it, even though it was pitch dark. Well, this object, they say, and at least the SCU, which stands for the Scientific Coalition for Ufology, this group of researchers were able to determine that indeed what the witness stated is what it did. So it flew around this area before coming back over the airport and out to the ocean. Now, some people argue that the object wasn't moving as like that. In the video, you do see the background moving very quickly, but they argue that when something is still and then something is moving, the thing that is moving, to the thing that is moving, this thing that still can look like it's moving because of something called parallax. When the background's moving so quickly, it looks like it's moving, but it's not. And that's what they think may have happened, that it was a balloon and the camera was just looked like it was moving. However, I think the researchers have established that it was moving how the the Homeland Security people saw it from the ocean and then back out to it. And you'd have to see the report as to why, but it appears to go behind some things. And it really seems to be out oceanside, out in the ocean during part of the video and on land during part of the video. So I'm not convinced that it was just a balloon. I think that it still is questionable. And at least some of the experts I've talked to, including that I've written about in this story, also believe that it's a much more mysterious video than... So I think that's one of the best ones to answer your question. So there you go. That's a really good one. Can you post the YouTube link here? Sure, go for it. UFO Chronicles UK is very mysterious. Oh, someone said they can't post the YouTube link. I don't know. Let me try. Let me try to post a YouTube link of that video so you guys can look at it, because it's a good one. Let's see. Well, let me post you the link to the Scientific Coalition for Ufology. I'm not even sure it's going to let me do that, but let's see what happens. Hey, it lets me do it. It's nice to be the admin. But let's go ahead and look at, let's see. Plower tried to post something. Didn't work. Sorry, guys. Maybe send it to me or something and I'll try to post it. But let's look at, since we're at openminds.tv, the news. That's what we're here for, right? UFO news. Because there's some really cool stuff here, and we got a lot to get to, so I better hurry up. This is great, and I think this is really important. Here's a scientist writing a story, or a story about a scientist. It's time to start taking the search for ET seriously, astronomer says. Things are a-changing, ladies and gentlemen. The Pentagon with a UFO project. The DOD releasing these files via FOIA. The Tucker Carlson had Nick Pope, who I'm interviewing, on Fox News just the other day to talk about it. And this is one of several appearances on Fox News that Nick Pope has done. And he's appeared on other news outlets. Lou Elizondo ran the Pentagon program, is on the news all over the place. David Fravor and other witnesses to that Nimitz account of the Tic Tac UFO, they're on the news, on CNN, on Fox, on everywhere. Times are a-changing, and scientists, astronomers, are invoking the extraterrestrial hypothesis for things that they're seeing in space that they can't explain, such as Amamua, that satellite, that essentially an asteroid that flew through our solar system. Some scientists suggested, well, maybe it's some sort of ET beacon or something flying around. And this scientist, astronomer Jason Wright, he was part of this study called Tabby Star, written right here. So essentially what happens with the Kepler, the way that they look for planets, because it's a planet hunter, is that it'll look at stars, and when stars dim, that means typically that something's moving in front of that star. So if something's moving around this way and it's not making the star dim, we're not going to be able to see it. But what we do is when that dims, we can study that, and we can study there's patterns, and usually discover something about the planets that are going around that sun. And that's essentially how Kepler is discovering, all of these exoplanets out there, and how we're discovering that there may be as many planets as there are stars out there, if not more. One NASA scientist said every star has a planet. Whoa, at least one. That means there's so many planets, it's ridiculous, it's insane. So scientists are really feeling more emboldened to say, hey, the stats are just showing there's got to be life out there, probably extraterrestrial civilizations, intelligent. Maybe we can detect them. Maybe we can see them. Tabby Star was one of these stars that was dimming, but it was dimming strangely and in a pattern that we couldn't understand. And we still don't completely know. But the scientist who discovered this and wrote the paper on it, and apparently Mr. Wright was part of that group, argued that, hey, this could be some sort of very advanced civilization that has built, something around its star to harness its energy that is making it dim this way. That alone is extraordinary, that you have these mainstream astronomers suggesting an extraterrestrial answer for something that they don't know. And we keep seeing this more and more and more. This scientist, Jason Wright, who was, one of the people that suggested that it could be extraterrestrial in nature, the Tabby star situation, is saying we really have to take this seriously. What he says here is that apparently there are papers that are being written and arguments being made by scientists to NASA and the government to fund the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, which is referred to as SETI. Now, not to confuse it with the SETI Institute. The SETI Institute is an organization, the most well-known organization that does this, but often when people reference SETI, they're referencing that institute. SETI is just an acronym actually for a field of work to search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And he's saying that SETI needs to be something that we're looking into, that we're doing. In particular, he uses this term called technosignatures. And I love this because this is a great term. One of the arguments, even when the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute began with this gentleman here, Frank Drake, that is mentioned, they began listening for radio signals. But even back then, it was controversial because scientists are saying, how do we know they're going to be using radio signals? It seems like they would be using technologies that are much more advanced. We need to be looking for something else. Well, I guess what Mr. Wright has proposed is that they can look for heat signatures. So essentially be able to discover heat being emitted from a planet to show that there is some sort of, something going on there, possibly by an advanced civilization creating stuff. So no doubt not just global warming, but also, this light right here that I'm using, or these lights around, or warming our houses. We're creating and generating heat, and the electricity and other technologies we use generate heat. So that could be something that we look for. But the idea is looking for signatures of technology beyond just radio signals, which, it seems very unlikely that a civilization out there would be using radio signals, or at least some people feel that way. So this is pretty cool that, there's this push going on for mainstream scientists to take the extraterrestrial possibility seriously. And that is wild. That's something new, and things are changing so quickly in that sense. So I put that story first because I feel it's really important. There's also been a couple UFO sighting stories. UFO sighting stories are usually not that interesting, honestly. I don't get that excited about them because 99% of them turn out to be something mundane. And it's not necessarily, I like to cover, and we cover mainstream news here. And a lot of mainstream, journalists or people who are picking up these stories, they're hearing from people out there. They're saying, hey, look, I saw a UFO in our neighborhood. And they're writing the story, but they don't necessarily know what it might or might not be. They're just putting the story out there. Sometimes they have time to talk to an astronomer or something to look for it, but sometimes they don't. In this case, we'll look at this. Again, it seems a bit suspect. Someone says it's probably a mylar balloon on a string. And actually, if you see this image here, you see this object, and then you do see a string coming from it. So I think that person is probably right. They said, well, it flickered. Well, with these balloons, and if you've looked at enough of these videos, which some of you have, when the sun hits them strangely, they flicker in odd ways. I mean, they're usually weird-shaped letters, stars, so they've got all of these different surfaces on them that can flicker in different ways. So this video is one of those that doesn't seem that terribly interesting. So, and some of these videos I show you that I think are interesting, people discover what they are later. So for instance, there's one in Utah, and maybe some of you in the chat are like, what about the one in Utah? What about the one in Utah? Well, my good buddy Mark D'Antonio, who's an astronomer, he's the Mutual UFO Network photo analyst. He has done some calculations and took some screenshots where it looks like that was a Falcon swooping in to kind of attack the drone that captured that object, which makes a lot of sense because the movement does seem like that. So that's what that Utah one seems to have been. But this is also really important too. So there's a lot of things out there that are generating interest in UFOs. The Pentagon project that I just talked about, but also Project Blue Book, which we talked about earlier. And there's a lot of news stories where local news agencies are like, hey, we need to get in there and write about UFOs in our area. And so there's have been a lot doing that in relation to Project Blue Book or the Pentagon program. But now, and a lot of them are referring to and using the data from the National UFO Reporting Center. We talked about this last week. And now it seems like that's really caught on because we're seeing these all over the place. So here's one on the Telegraph, an Illinois paper. And sure enough, they're talking about, hey, we had 102 UFO sightings in 2018. It used to be, I would write a story every year about UFO sightings of the year. My story would come out in January, and maybe it would get picked up here and there. But, it had to be people like us compiling that information. Now, all of these local news areas are doing that on their own. They're looking up, number of UFO sightings in their area. 102. That's a lot. Let's say that only 10% of 102 sightings are something that are truly unexplainable. That's like 10 sightings in a year, 10 things that you can't explain. Even if it's 1%, that's 1.2 things that you can't explain. Even one is all we're looking for, right? So it's really cool that these stories are popping up because it shows that people are interested in the UFO sightings in their area. One may ask, well, why are they using the New Fork when we all know the Mutual UFO Network is kind of the big dog out there with investigators in every state, and they take reports from all over the place? It's because it's really easy to look at UFO reports on this site. I mean, just a couple clicks and you've got, boom, all the reports. Now, these reports aren't investigated like the MUFON ones are, but if you're just someone visiting the MUFON site, you can only look at the last 20 sightings. So if there's anybody from MUFON on, this is something that they really got to do, is that this is gold. This is PR gold. New Fork is getting so many hits and so much attention. And so if MUFON wanted to get that, and they've got to share their data better. So this is, I think, just significant that we have all these stories. I had several in last week's news. We've just got this one. But what's great about this and these that we've been covering is they're in big metropolitan areas like Chicago. So let's get into some other news. So this news is essentially, I already told you about what Nick Pope and I will be talking about in that FOIA document that document that was released via FOIA to the the Federation of American Scientists, and that Nick was able to get through the PR department. Talks about the products, the DIRDs, and I forget what the DIRD stands for. It's something about like their reports, their research reports. And in these reports, you see talk about a lot of weird stuff. And so that all of these stories have popped up about this, including in Fox News and CNN and the New York Times. And I can't think of particular stories in those, but I know it's been a lot of major media that's been covering it, and it's still getting covered. So I won't talk too much on this. I'll probably talk more on it next week. But Nick Pope and I talk about this in detail on the next podcast. So definitely check that out. And of course, I post the podcast on YouTube, or if you're a podcast listener, you can subscribe to it practically anywhere, and you can also find it right here in the Open Minds UFO radio page. By the way, if you're a podcast listener, a lot of people ask about the opening music, and that is done by this guy here, Caleb Hanks. He's awesome, and if you click this link, you can go get that music for free and other music that he creates. Also, big And they're a little shout out here to KGR Radio. They're really cool. They, of course, play the show as well. Just show that to you real quick before we get into some more news here. Now, normally I only list mainstream outlets on my UFO headlines there, but once in a while I'll post some non-mainstream headlines, and these are usually because they're very well written or I think sharing some great information. This is one called the Silva Record, and there's a couple websites that have popped up, and I think it's just people. One day I'm going to do a podcast with this guy, because I think they're just inspired by the Pentagon program to start to follow it and share information about it. And so the Silver Record, he's been doing that. And in the New York Times article, they talked about having these metamaterials, these materials that are potentially from UFOs that they're researching. And so what he did here was compile a lot of that information. He's got videos, he's got clips from interviews where Tom DeLonge, the founder, Lou Elizondo, and that's Hal Puthoff, one of the scientists with To the Stars, where they're all talking about these metamaterials, these materials that could be of extraterrestrial origin, right? Could be technology that we can't understand. So several scientists and their comments are listed in here, but I think that he did a great job outlining what's going on with this research and where those materials and what the nature of some of those materials are. So definitely check this out. Really good story. I told you we were going to talk about the Space Force, and if you saw on my blog, I have a video where I outline the Space Force. But one of the things when we're talking about the Space Force, and in that video that I did there, we already have a U.S. Air Force Space Command that is in charge of the things that this Space Force would be in charge of, essentially monitoring space, weaponizing space. In fact, here's Pence talking about the Space Force a few months ago, and Pence referred to it as Space Command, not Space Force. We want to create a Space Command. But there is a U.S. Air Force Space Command, like I said. So the news just came out, as you can see here, that the White House is saying, okay, well, we'll create a Space Force under the Air Force then as a first step before making it its own branch, because that was the main push that Pence is talking about here, that Trump has been talking about, having the Space Force be a new branch of the military. What I don't understand is now they've kind of said, okay, we'll just create it under the Air Force, but we already have a Space Command under the Air Force. So to me, this news that just came out today is really confusing, because how is Space Command going to work with this new Space Force? I have a feeling they're not going to create a new Space Force, that maybe it'll be under Space Command. Maybe they'll rename Space Command the Space Force, although, of course, it's kind of a silly name, quite frankly, and a lot of people have made fun of the name. In fact, there is by the producers of The Office, a new sitcom coming out called Space Force that's going to be making fun of the whole thing. So this news is really interesting that came out today, but it seems like they've kind of settled and said, okay, well, we'll table this for now and just run with your Air Force program, but we want to get back to this in the future. Why do they even want to do this? Essentially, what they're saying is the Air Force isn't spending enough time and money on the issue of space threats. And what they mean by that is not aliens. A lot of people, of course, have said aliens and suspect they mean aliens. But what they mean are the Chinese and the Russians. Like I told you earlier, there's a new space race to the moon. Could the moon be a platform for weapons? There are different people that have talked about at least how the moon would be a good military platform, at least in observing the planet and possibly having being able to essentially take out satellites. This is about satellite battles and stuff like that. So the Chinese have they have destroyed one of their own satellites with apparently a missile. So they have a satellite killer. So everybody's racing to build all of these weapons. And that's what this is all about. So it's not about aliens, guys. So chill out about that. I know lots of conspiracy-minded people will speculate and tell you otherwise, but I would like to see the evidence. If you look, this whole Space Force conversation has been going on a long time. In fact, this conversation about what we do about it is what created Space Command in the Air Force in the first place. And this is just a continuation of that same conversation. The Air Force and apparently the military feel that they do have things under control. Here's a great journalist, Leonard David. I like this guy. He is talking about the U.S. military space plane. Yeah, this is weird. So see this, the X-37B. When we talk about a secret space program, we really don't have any, zero. And when I say any, I mean absolutely zero evidence that there is a secret space program. I know there's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of very dubious claims from dubious people. I think there's misinterpreted information that has been observed as well. But we have nothing substantial to say that we have a secret space program that entails like large ships like the TV show Stargate or something. But in a way, we do have a secret space program in this, the X-37B. And we probably have other, we've got satellites, things like that. But this little space plane, which you can see looks like a small space shuttle, is something that the Air Force flies. It is top secret. We don't know what's in the payload of this thing, but it has been flying around for 500 days on a secret mission. It does these really long secret missions. So that's what Leonard David's writing about here. So if there is a secret space program, which there is, this is it. It's not giant star destroyers. And here's one of the reasons why, is there are many, many telescopes aimed at the sky. There are not only astronomers, there are also amateur astronomers. And some of the websites that UFO researchers use that tell us, when a certain satellite's going to be in our area. Some of you may know you can get on an app right now and see what satellites are coming above you so you can watch them and see them. That's because there are amateur astronomers who are watching the sky. And when they see a new object up there, a new satellite, they log it and follow it and submit it to these databases because some of these are top secret, just like this. And we can see those from our planet. We can see those things flying around. So if there was something large, if we can see something this small, and by small I mean something around, I think this thing's 25 feet long. Actually, it maybe looks a little longer, but I thought I had read it was 25 feet. But regardless, it's not a very big thing. Let's say it's 50 feet. If we could see something that large, we would definitely see something as large as, let's say, the USS Eldridge, which we were looking at before, which is 300 feet, a destroyer class Navy ship. We would be able to see that. And that's one of the biggest problems with the whole space program theory. But there's your space program. There's your friggin' space program. Otherwise, let's see what we got here. We've got astronomers spot mysterious long trash bag object floating above the Earth. Not really much to say here. This isn't really news yet. I just wanted to bring it to you first because no doubt some conspiracy-minded UFO person is going to look at that. I can think of some hoaxer types that are out there that are going to see this and they're going to create a big conspiracy around it. Some might be watching the show and they're like, ooh, great idea. I'm going to go tell everybody, look, there's an alien flying around the planet and astronomers have spotted it. No, they're saying it's really light. It is flying around the Earth, and it is really just a very light object. It seems like it's something lightweight, kind of like space junk or something. They're not sure what it is yet, but something that we'll keep an eye on. But there's absolutely no indication that this is something mysterious. But I'm sure that somebody's going to claim otherwise very soon because that's what happens in this field. Now, finally, I think this is my second to last story here, is a warning. Do not go past the gates if you are visiting Area 51. And here's why. So this is a story by Tyler Rogaway. If that name sounds familiar, it should. He was a recent guest on Podcast UFO with Martin Willis, but I also had him on months ago because he's got an interest in UFOs. He's a defense writer, but he's been writing some UFO stories and some really, really good ones in the last few months, now he feels more emboldened and like it's okay. If the New York Times is writing about UFOs, I can write about UFOs. And a lot of the media is feeling that way. And so that's who Tyler Rogoway is. But this is a story that just came out the other day. Bizarre chase through high security Nevada nuclear test site ends in deadly shooting. So this is right near Area 51. This is like it says, Department of Energy. Essentially, this is a huge swath of land. Let's see if we can see a picture. Here it is. Nevada test site. And you can see here's Area 20, Area 19, Area 12. All of these are pockmarks where they've tested nuclear devices. But right near here, and I can't remember which side of it, is Area 51, because there's a bunch of other areas besides these places where they've tested the nukes. I think it's right up here, because this is just a huge area. But it's right by Area 51, and you'll notice this looks like, if you've been there, just like the Area 51 gates. But you have these signs that say, don't go past, don't go past. If you saw my episode with the Kardashians, I told them, don't go past, and they were freaking out, Dad, don't go past the gates. Because here's what happened. Some guy did drive past those gates. He got 8 miles in before he was stopped. He got out of his car. He had something cylindrical in his hand. He would not stop and give up, so they shot and killed this guy. I mean, they take it very seriously. There are other stories that we've covered on openminds.tv where, in fact, let's see if I can find some pictures because they're pretty cool, where people have done things like this. Of course, this is about Bob Lazar. Bob Lazar, he's the guy who claimed to work on flying saucers at Area 51 or near there. And he is the guy who made Area 51 famous. And so here's a video here of a family held at gunpoint. They were some foreign visitors to Area 51 who for some reason didn't stop at the gate, and you could see the truck stop them. Now, this is only a few hundred feet inside the gate because the person who took the pictures was another tourist who did stop at the gate and took these pictures. But they were stopped and held at gunpoint here. There's other stories that we have. I like this one. Man sneaks up on Area 51 camo dudes. They get mad. So he snuck up on him. He wasn't past the gate. But the camo guys, he was messing with them, and they didn't like that. They didn't hurt him, but they chased him around. He hid from them. It was really kind of a Keystone Cops kind of moment. And then there's another video we've got here where a tourist bus accidentally passed a sign because the guy was talking. But anyway, they all get stopped. You get pulled guns. You typically often get arrested. And then if you follow their instructions. If you don't follow their instructions, they will shoot to kill, as they did just the other day in this situation. So don't mess with the camo dudes at Area 51. That's what they're called, camo dudes, because they wear their camo outfits. Finally, the last story, and I put it at the end because it's kind of, it's in an Indian paper, Sunday Guardian Live, and they're writing, it's just kind of an article about UFO sightings, and it's about how not all UFO sightings are discovered. You know, it's kind of this person's kind of article on why UFOs, they feel it's credible and that they're not always seen, so or they're not always explained. So that's what this is about. It's kind of interesting. You can read it if you want. It's nothing new, but it is, a mainstream paper, at least I guess in India, that is writing about UFOs. So there you go. There is the news for the week. I guess I don't have much else to share with you except for be sure to check out Open Minds UFO Radio. That airs on KGRA on Monday night, like in the middle of the night. And then I post it on Tuesday. So if you're a podcast listener, you'll see it then. Let's go back to here and check really quick if there are any questions. Let's see. No, it was not Rogoway trespassing. He is a good dude. Someone agrees that the secret space program is dubious. Someone asked if one name in particular is a dubious source, and I don't want to use the name, but here's what I'll say. Yes, and here's why. It is dubious to rely solely on speculation, even if it is somewhat informed speculation, but if the information comes from dubious sources in the first place. So that's the issue. Right now, we have a situation where there is a plethora of legitimate information regarding UFOs that we have at our fingertips. It is a time where we've never had something like this before. And of course, Nick Pope and I talk about that, but this is some of that information that we have. Otherwise, a lot of researchers out there speculate. Well, this happened, so this must be happened, or this must be the case, and this must be. You know, as a journalist, someone who's researched this and many other situations for well over a decade, you learn not to rely on speculation, or try not even to speculate too much, because when you get down and you start digging and you start talking to the key players or the people with the information, the subject matter experts, you find out, wow, was I off? And so it's a waste of time to even speculate, because rarely are you right. And it's just, you don't have enough information. Until you talk to the experts, you don't know what's going on. And really, there are no experts to talk to in this case. We have Lou Elizondo, but he's limited in what he can say because much of what he worked on is still classified. So we've got a lot of people, and it's been kind of a thing in the UFO field to do a lot of speculating because there's a lack of information out there. And some people have built, whole world views on speculation. And but that's all it is speculate. Anybody can speculate. Any of you out there are just as capable of speculating as many of the top UFO researchers. So when the information is based off of speculation, it certainly is very dubious. Even if it's not built solely off speculation but anecdotal information, it's still fairly dubious unless that anecdotal information comes from an expert, especially if it's someone who's credible and whose information can be backed up by other sources. However, when you have one person coming from out of nowhere claiming all of these wild stories, you can't base, an entire space program off of something like that. And really, if you look at it, there are very few people who are sources for this alleged space program information. Very, very few. Like 3 people are usually the top sources for this information. One of those people is a hacker from the UK, Gary, I forget his name right now, someone in the chat might tell me. But this guy, and I've written a long story on it, this guy was drunk and stoned when he was hacking into government computers, NASA computers, and others. He said what he was doing was going in and essentially trying the password of password. He was getting into computers that did not have classified information. He says he saw a picture of a craft above a planet, but he couldn't download it. And that he says this, that he was too drunk and stoned to think about downloading some of this. He said he saw a roster of non-terrestrial officers, 2 or 3 other things. And I've got what I think is one of the best stories on this in openminds.tv, where I say, well, what did this guy really find? Here's his name, Gary McKinnon. And right here, what did UFO hacker really find? And if you want to read this, and it's all sourced. So I source actual interviews with Gary McKinnon here. And I wasn't looking to defame this guy, not whatsoever. I just wanted to compile for the UFO community, what has this guy really said about UFOs? We know he talked about UFOs. We know he hacked, and this is a big story. But what did he say about UFOs? So that's why I put this together, and I was just trying to understand the story. And this is what he says, that he was drunk and stoned when he looked up this information. And this is what he thinks he might have seen, but he has no evidence of it. But you can see it all here and then see what you think. But it's just you can't, off of this information, jump to the assumption without anything that is corroborating it that there is some kind of major space program. So, yeah, it is really dubious. And, hey, I would love to be able to discover that it's otherwise. That would be really interesting. I find the X-37B that we were just looking at, the real secret space program, terribly interesting. So if we had something more, are you kidding? I would love that. But there just really isn't enough information out that right now. So we do have a bunch of dubious speculation and assumptions going on. People collecting dots where the majority of these dots just don't exist. They're assumed. So that's why I say that it's dubious stuff. So there you go. Thank you so much for joining us this week. Thank you for your excellent questions. I'm going to put in my little end screen here. What else do I got? Oh, I don't know. I keep it. There we go, because then I'll put around. Here's some other videos to watch over here. Please push that button down there and subscribe. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you, all of you in the chat. Thank you to the 8 Ball for your insights into our future and answering our questions. It's been wonderful to have you. I hope to see you next week. Until then, adios.